Welcome to the April the 11th, 2022 meeting of the Sandusky City Commission. We'll have an invocation offered by Commissioner Harris, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
It is said that big ideas come from forward-thinking people who challenge the norm, think outside the box, and invent the world they see inside rather than submitting to the limitations of current dilemmas. God, I ask that you continue to give this governing body, as well as our constituents, the foresight, wisdom, and resources to continue to develop this community, one that is inclusive and representative of how we see our future. Thank you.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Present.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mr. Pajali?
Here.
Mr. Waddington?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Meinzer?
Here.
Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our meeting of March the 28th, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move that we accept the minutes of the March 28th meeting and dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Any residents with comments regarding tonight's agenda items, please step to the podium. Share with us your name and address and your comments regarding this agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. The first question is on item number 1, which is the Chapter 735 public vendors throughout the entire city here. I don't know if you all took the time to read everything in there. It's quite lengthy, but I took the time. Section 735.4, which is the fee schedule, is going from fees set by this body, the commission, to fees, it looks like, at the discretion of the Division of Planning. And that would be a concern that they would yearly be able to set the fees as they so desired. If I'm reading it right, maybe I can get a clarification on that. Item number 4 and 7, those were both taken off the agenda at the last meeting, and there's a perception out there that those were taken off the agenda because there were not enough votes at that time at the commission table to pass those as an emergency and so forth. And so they were taken off and put on this agenda for this week. On item number 4, which is the Paper District Marina District seasonal dockage increase, this will be the second or third time that the recreation departments come to this body asking for an increase, more seasonal dockage from transient dockage. And that means either one of two things: that the operators aren't making enough money operating that marina, or number 2, the idea of a transient marina there, which would have supposed to be a draw from boaters from the islands, is not working. Paper District Marina was never promised. They were promised a marina by Maroos Brothers, but as a separate marina from the transient marina. Their marina never did happen, and I'm being told that the marina wants more seasonal dockage for residents of the Chesapeake, and I would ask for proof that everyone who's a seasonal docker there is from the Chesapeake and not just from the rest of the community. If we want to accommodate the Chesapeake people, that's fine, but if we're opening it up to everybody in the city or out of the city, then that's a different issue. I will ask about 629 East Adams Street being a transient rental at this time. I know she's having a presentation for a hearing tonight, but my question would be is, it's not in the overlay district. Are we saying that, well, this is close enough? And I guess what is close enough? Where do we draw the line as far as other properties in that vicinity coming to this body wanting to change the zoning? I mean, I don't know if you would consider this spot zoning or not, but it's very close to being spot zoning. So maybe she could answer that question during the process of the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwager. Additional comments by residents regarding agenda items?
Good afternoon. My name is Charlie Murray. I reside at 1409 Cedar Point. I'm here to speak on item number 4, which is the Paper District Marina. As this body knows, that I am in the marina business, and so I'm here to speak as a neighboring property to the Paper District. The original promise to the community was that this would be a transient marina, not a seasonal marina, that the city received grant money, I believe, and the city has lost its way in the promise it made. The community subsidized a public facility against a private marina right down the road. The city could and should lose its tax status if it goes forward with this plan, because it would be less than half transient, would be more seasonal, and therefore it should fall into the private sector and then be taxed accordingly. Right now, the city charges $2,850 for their docks, which is for a 40-foot dock. I charge $3,500 for a 40-foot dock, and the reason for that difference is in part because I pay taxes, and I have to keep up my marina and employ my dock hands. And I believe that the city has a waiting list because we built ours first. We built a first-class marina. People want to be in downtown Sandusky. And now the city has a waiting list. If those people are denied a seasonal dockage at your marina, they'll come to the private sector. There is no shortage of private sector docks. There's no proven need for this change. In fact, there's a need for transient marinas, transient slips. If you think back to the days of the bike rally, the city of Sandusky is overwhelmed with boats. We're sold out on transients, and I'm sure the city of Sandusky is too. I think this is probably just an opportunity for the city to make up for transient slips that aren't properly marketed, to try to convert those to seasonal. I also don't believe that the Chesapeake building, unlike Mr. Schwanger, I don't believe the Chesapeake residents should have an opportunity to rent these on a seasonal basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Additional comments from the public regarding agenda items? Those questions will be addressed as the specific legislation comes before us, hopefully. Next on our agenda, probably one of the best parts of this job for all of us, the presentation of the key to our city, to our friends at Victory Kitchen. And I would ask that they come up and stand at the podium while I say these nice things about you. We have the pleasure of granting the keys to the city to an organization that's nourished hundreds of thousands of people in the last 31 years right here in Sandusky. Victory Kitchen began when Reverend Lonnie Walters fed the homeless with the help of his entire family. His ministry grew, and now his family continues his legacy and his mission of ensuring no one is left hungry in our city. Victory Kitchen has served 1 million hot meals to the homeless, the battered, the broken, and helpless members of our community right here in Sandusky. Full course breakfast and lunches, groceries, holiday meals, holiday gifts, food bags are served Monday through Friday every week. During the winter months, blankets, coats, hats, and gloves are given to those in need. They supply children with school supplies and cold winter attire to help alleviate the cost of struggling families. Showers are provided 3 days a week with toiletry items for the homeless. They offer free counseling and assistance in completing applications for employment and for community assistance programs, so these people can have a chance at getting a job. Their facility is not government funded, but they continue their mission with the support of our community, this government. Victory Kitchen began humbly, but it's grown to meet the ever-changing needs of our community. With the pandemic halted operations in their dining room, the staff knew they couldn't shut their doors. Instead, they served the hungry through a pass-through window. That happened so often, the window was worn out and it had to be replaced. They never stopped providing a life-changing service to so many families in this city. Pastor Luke, Pastor Carolyn, and everyone on your staff, You will never know the magnitude of your work, but your community sees the immense good you do each and every day. We thank you for your unwavering dedication to fighting hunger in Sandusky. To commemorate your efforts, I'm pleased to present you with the keys to the city of Sandusky. God bless you and all you serve.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You can stay right there, I'll come to you.
Awesome. Could I say something, please?
You can.
I want to say it's a great honor to serve such a great community. This community is so strong. When things get tough, they always pull together. They always got a helping hand from somebody else. And I want to thank you guys for supporting us as we do the mission. As my father would say, we met as friends, but now we're family. And I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Started to try mine, sir. Go get some food and I'm a little kid. It's getting there.
Thank you very much.
Hey, young man, is that your dad?
Thank you.
Is that your dad? Dad, you proud? Thanks so much for all you do.
Tell them to give you some of that food. You're just kind of skinny
Can I
there.
get one too?
Yeah.
I have the same thing, my children and my wife call me. Right. Well, that's important.
That's awesome.
So I had a great trial. Thanks for
Get that autograph. Comes right.
I had him on the stand across the nation. And it just says.
Mr. Walters, we'll let you get out of here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I can't talk right now.
Next, we have a public hearing regarding amending the zoning map for 629 East Adams Street. This hearing will be conducted by our chief planner, Aaron Blair. Aaron, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Brady. That's a tough act to follow. I'm here to conduct a public hearing today for the consideration of rezoning a single parcel to extend the transient rental overlay district to cover that parcel. It is 629 East Adams Street, parcel number is 56-00584. This was heard in a public hearing by the Planning Commission on February 23rd this year, and the Planning Commission recommended to the City Commissioners to approve this zoning change.
Questions or comments, Commissioners, for Ms. Blair?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
as I understand it, technically, instead of, maybe we're both changing the zoning and extending the transient overlay district, but we are also, I want to make sure that this is correct, we are extending and modifying the boundaries of the transient overlay district. Is that correct?
Correct. Through the Commission Chair, we are expanding the overlay district to cover this parcel. So the underlying zoning of this parcel will not change.
Okay.
The only thing that's changing is the expansion of the overlay district, if approved. To a previous question, since it's contiguous, this parcel is contiguous to the existing transient rental overlay. This is the most appropriate and least, the easiest, smallest measure to be done to allow the use of transient occupancy onto this parcel. And it was the same way the overlay district was expanded once before onto a couple other parcels. So we're following that precedent.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner?
Chairman,
Commissioner Poole?
there's a drawing, what's the existing overlay now? Is there a reason you're not showing that?
If I zoomed out to it, it would be harder to see this parcel. So this diagram was just showing the parcel in question. That whole district can be envisioned on our zoning map. So if you go to the zoning map, it's a kind of a strange shaped zigzaggy parcel covering the Cove District.
Mr. Chairman,
John.
this item did come before the Planning Commission, and we did agree to extend this. I think we felt it was close enough to the Cove Street area where there's some transient housing now. But this is a subject that the Planning Commission has wrestled with for the past few months, and we intend to look at it closely and maybe tighten some things up and put some processes and procedures in place that will tighten things up a little bit, because it is somewhat subjective and it has been a tough issue to get our arms around.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meisner.
I didn't know if it was appropriate to bring it up during the hearing or during the resolution or the ordinance, but I read the Planning Commission minutes and I see they were all in favor of it, and it is contiguous to the current Cove District, and I like the fact that it's adjoining the bike path. And I also read that, I know Mr. Holliday's been working on criteria, try to bring more neighborhoods in. And I think the bike path would be a great barometer to measure this with. If it was close to being access to our bike path, east, west, downtown, be something to measure, just throw that in there. But I know this is it's a moving target. Everybody wants to do it all over town. I don't know how we set the criteria and where we pick, but this one seems to meet the criteria that Mr. Schwanger just asked about. I think it falls in there, right next to the current district.
As this is a public hearing, the public is invited to ask questions or comments regarding this presentation.
Yes, Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. Just look, Aaron, just looking at this, does that mean that everything in orange on that side of the street is also part, or you're suggesting that eventually it'll be part of the overlay, or what is the orange section?
Through the chair, thank you. The orange underlying zoning is residential two-family, and that's a large portion of our downtown if you look at our zoning district. So it's really nothing to do with the transient rental overlay. The overlay is on top.
Okay, I was looking at that side of the street, which is part of the overlay?
Yeah, so on the right, you can see the black boundary, and there's a really light diagonal hatch. So that is the overlay that's on top of the orange. It kind of changes the orange color. And so if it's over top of a yellow, it just is like black diagonal stripes, and that's how you see it on our zoning map.
Okay, so to the right of 629 East Adams, that's owned by someone different?
There you go.
That's where the community garden is, correct?
Correct.
But that's not the same owner?
Correct.
Okay, so it's not really contiguous?
It is contiguous.
The parcel is contiguous to the overlay district.
Okay.
That's the overlay district.
Additional comments or questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, there's one thing.
Commissioner Meisner.
When he brought up I know Chief,
Willie,
pardon?
Willie.
Yeah,
Willie.
yeah. McCarthy, we used to call him Chief McCarthy, but Willie McCarthy. He owns that corner lot, and he fell on ill health, I know, and I know the city owns a lot next to it. This may be an opportunity to approach Mr. McCarthy. I mean, I don't want to tip the hand, but if it was reasonable, maybe the city acquire that property because it does get overgrown with weeds and probably will be a code compliance issue. It came up in planning. It might be something we look at that clean that whole corner up. Maybe somebody will develop it into another vacation rental or something if we zone this one accordingly.
Can look into that.
Pardon?
So we could look into
Yeah.
that.
Additional comments or questions? Not, I'll consider this public hearing closed.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is presentation by our city manager on the Federal Rescue Plan Funds. Mr. Whoops.
Thanks, Cody. Good afternoon, commissioners, audience, and staff. As you know, the city's budget was dramatically impacted by the pandemic in 2020. We were probably the hardest hit state. I've not seen our hardest hit city within the state as far as the impact on our per capita revenue in 2020. We lost in 2020, I believe, about $7 million off of our projected revenue. And we were hit so hard by the pandemic because obviously we're highly dependent on Cedar Point for admissions taxes. And when those went off the cliff, it forced us to make some very difficult decisions, including suspending most of our capital programs for up to a 2-year period, as well as
restructuring staff and eliminating some positions. In total, over 2020 and 2021, we lost about $9 million from our general fund. And in the midst of that, there was a federal conversation going on about stimulus dollars that led to the very narrow passage in March of 2021, a $350 billion stimulus package for states, counties, and cities. Very fortunately, and we want to first of all thank Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur and Senator Sherrod Brown, who were big champions for passing that and fought for cities like Sandusky that were impacted. Fortunately, Sandusky was given a little over $18 million, which is actually the largest allocation between the city of Toledo and the city of Lorraine along the North Shore of Ohio. Because of our demographics and because of how hard we were hit by the pandemic. There were 4 categories that the funds could be used for, replacing that lost revenue from 2020 and 2021. In addition to that, responding to the far-reaching public health and negative economic impacts of the pandemic. And there were some specific things such as improving open-air recreation so that people could spend more time outside, for example, which you'll see when we get to some of our recommendations, providing pay for essential workers, and investing in other forms of infrastructure such as water, sewer, and broadband. One of the restrictions on the use of the funds, and partially what's driving a lot of our expenditures in tonight's presentation for your feedback, is that the funds have to be obligated by the end of 2024. So long-term projects, as you know, can take time to plan and to implement. So as we began to look at what priorities we could have for the city, we took a look at existing pipelines of projects that were in place and being planned. In addition to that, we took into account feedback that we received in the 2016 Bicentennial Vision Plan, as well as the 2019 and 2020 Downtown Master Plan, but particularly when we went out into the community last summer for a series of several meetings, for neighborhood meetings with the commission, we asked for priorities, and priorities that we heard at that time, including investing in parks and recreation, continuing to repave streets and making our streets safer, and ensuring affordable housing and strong housing options in city neighborhoods were top priorities. So as staff began to meet to talk about how we could allocate the stimulus funds or the ARPA funds that we received, we tried to focus on those areas. And we're breaking it down into 4 categories tonight that I'd say before I dive into the specifics of each of these 4 categories, we really viewed this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make significant investments in Sandusky that has not come around before and is unlikely to come around again. And one of the things that we realized through a great staff is that for decades, Sandusky's demographics have been in decline, which put increasing pressure on city budgets and services. And that because of that, and trying to maintain service levels of police and fire departments, for example, a lot of the infrastructure that the city is responsible for maintaining over the years was neglected and was in serious states of deferred maintenance. You know, the most obvious one and the one that we hear about the most is our local streets. We also, our local parks, the city has about 30 parks scattered throughout the city. And at the time of the passage of Issue 8 in 2014, only one city park had been renovated in about a dozen years. So we inherited a very, under-maintained park system. In addition to that, and those are the things that the public sees and that we heard about on a day-to-day basis, and we are very proud of the investments that we've made in our streets and our parks and recreational activities over the last 7 years since the passage of Issue 8. But as you know, it's really hard to make up for 40 or 50 years in 7 or 8 short years while you're continuing trying to provide great police, fire, and other services to the city. But in addition to that, with those being the infrastructure that people see out in the community, there's a lot of infrastructure in the community that people don't see, which are the vehicles that we use to provide services to the city and the facilities from which we provide those services. So as we looked at this, we said we have $18 million with some pretty significant restrictions on both what you're allowed to spend and timing. How can we shore up and build on the success we've had in the last 7 years of Issue 8 by making generational investments in our streets, in our park systems, and in our vehicles and our facilities? So that was an important part of this. And so as you look at this pie chart here, you'll see that we're recommending that about $5.5 million go towards repaving our local streets. And also there's a chunk of that, 10% of that, is to go towards making some significant investments in our underpasses, I should say, which are an important infrastructure that there's no real funding source for how to take care of those, but we have a lot of responsibility. In addition to that, recreation and neighborhood revitalization, we're recommending about $4.65 million go into that category. we have a category, which I'll go into more detail in just a minute, which we call community assets. And that is how, in addition to those assets in which the city is responsible for, like our parks, like our streets, like our buildings, like our vehicles, there are a lot of other institutions and entities in the city whose services or whose mission is just as important to the everyday quality of life of the city, like the State Theater, like the Sandusky Library, like the Sandusky City Schools. And so we are recommending that we help to make investments, and many of those were not eligible for stimulus funding. There's a lot of debate about whether they should be. So really the only opportunity for them to receive a stimulus was through a partnership with the city as we look to making the entire community stronger, not just what is under the auspices of the city of Sandusky. And then finally, our municipal services and facilities, which, as I get into the details of that section, gets at making investments in those vehicles, making investments in those facilities, and then also offsetting through investing in staff so we continue to provide services in spite of $9 million hit on a $24 million budget over a 2-year period. And I do want to note there's an asterisk in this presentation that shows that $4.785 million has already been allocated. The entire amount that's been allocated has already been voted on by the commission. The largest chunk of that, about $3 million, is the previous 2 years' local street resurfacing programs. In addition, the commission voted to put funding into the engineering and design of the Justice Center, which fits into that facilities piece, so that we're able to, continue to have a solid facility from which the court and the police department can operate. So with that, I'll dive into a little more detail in each of these. Local street resurfacing, this is just a map of what we've done over the previous few years. I think it's important to note that this builds on, it does not replace what we're investing into streets from Issue 8 and other sources. We've been investing $1.5 million a year into local infrastructure since the passage of Issue 8. We will continue to do that. In addition, we will layer on these local street investments so that we can continue to accelerate what we've done. And just to put that into perspective, with that funding from Issue 8, we were able to do about 80 total segments of streets over a 4-year period. When we do this year's investment, which builds on the previous 2 years, we will have done 270 segments or over 7 miles of streets within the city of Sandusky. So we're doing everything we can to catch up fast, make this paving go forward so that we can repave as much of the city as possible. We continue to build strong capital budgets to invest our other local resources in the street network, all the while trying to build up our maintenance program with streets so that once these streets are repaved, we can maintain them longer. In addition to that, I know Josh Snyder from Aaron's office has been working on a plan for our underpasses, because we know that those are always in a continual state of decline, and they get a lot of water that comes through, and the railroads don't always do a great job up top with their part of it. So we're trying to make sure that we have funds to do our part to shore those up so they don't continue to deteriorate, so that a future commission isn't saddled figuring out how to undo another Tiffin underpass like what we've been dealing with here over the last several years. In addition to that, recreation and neighborhood revitalization. Again, this was the topic that we hear the most about or heard the most about as we surveyed the community and asked them what they wanted to see happen. You're seeing this really get divided into a few different areas. One is that even as we've done investments in 12 neighborhood parks since the passage of Issue 8, there's a few projects that we haven't been able to get to because their scope was just a little bit larger or more complicated. One of those is Churchwell Park, which sits as a centerpiece of the ongoing Southside Master Plan process, which will kick off this summer. We had a planning call on that today. We want to make a significant investment in Churchwell Park with the resources from the stimulus. In addition to that, we had other large-scale deferred maintenance projects as it relates to the city's recreation assets. One of those is the skate park, which is probably about 15 years past its useful life, and we've been patching that up, but it's a large project. We'll finally have the resources to invest in the skate park through the stimulus. In addition to that, our tennis courts at Battery Park, which we're envisioning will be relocated along with the rec center to the American Cran site, and in hopes to have a partnership with Sandusky City Schools. We'll have shared tennis courts. And then finally, the rec center site itself, the public space portion of that infrastructure and the site amenities, the Sandusky Bay Pavilion, which the commission made a major investment in to finally tear down the abandoned pool that was gathering water at Surf's Up several years ago, but we've been unable to improve that park. And I know I've heard from commissioners from time to time, what is the plan for that? This provides us with significant resources to reinvest back in the Sandusky Bay Pavilion and make those improvements. And then finally, some of this funding is dedicated to help with the right-of-way acquisition for the Sandusky Bay Pathway project itself. So that's the recreation and neighborhood revitalization. And again, for that streets and transportation, we were at $5.5 million. For the recreation and neighborhood revitalization, we're at $4.65 million, or roughly a quarter of the plan dedicated to those activities. And then we get into community assets. Very early on in the process, Commissioner Waddington set the tone for reinvesting in other assets in the community when he made a motion to invest in OGO, Victory Kitchen, and Care and Share, who are providing critical frontline services for those who are being impacted by the pandemic. In addition to that, the leadership of this commission stepped up very early after receiving stimulus to Good Time 1 to make sure that that boat could continue to operate and be a part of the future of this city. In several conversations with the library, the Sandusky City Schools, and the State Theater, we are recommending that this commission vote to make additional investments to support the renovation of the State Theater, to support the library's existing capital improvement plan, and to support the new pool project at Sandusky City Schools, because all of those will service this community and all of those are in need of an investment. And again, we're not specifically eligible for stimulus dollars. So we're trying to support the institutions that also make this a great place to live. And then finally, one of the things that's been dramatically accelerated and has been an issue in Sandusky for a while is affordable housing. And it's one of the expressly stated uses for stimulus dollars. So we are recommending making a one-time investment in an affordable housing fund with the goal of supporting a large-scale multifamily project with units that will be set aside as affordable going forward. And then finally, in the last slide, municipal services and facilities, we're setting aside a certain portion to replace vehicles. In addition to that, facility upgrades for the greenhouse, the golf course, the cemetery, and local fire stations. We have set aside funds in each of the years to offset those losses from 20 and 21 by funding staff positions that are eligible. And then finally, an update to the city's strategic plan, which was last updated in the 2015, passed in January of 2016. We're now 2 years operating outside of the scope of that plan. We think it's time to re-energize that, and that the stimulus is a good opportunity for us to engage the community again later this year to set a plan forward for how we build on the momentum of things like the Cedar Point deal, like Issue 8, and like this stimulus, which put the city in a good place. I'm happy to answer any questions on this, and again, I want to make it clear, these are just recommendations at this point. And while we've set aside recommended amounts for specific projects and budgets, everything will have to come back to the city commission to be voted on at a later date. But we wanted to get feedback today because, again, this is a lot of money and there are tight deadlines. And so staff really needs good direction to be able to move forward so that we can get all this obligated by the end of 2024, which, as we know, will be here faster than we all hope and think. So happy
Comments
to take
or questions for City Manager?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Whiting.
I like everything you presented, and then Friday when I met with this, I'm in agreement with this, but Mr. Horstman was at the cleanup Saturday, and I think maybe Mr. Klein saw the pictures. The Tiffin Avenue, the wall is basically gone. I cleaned that up last November. We swept and shoveled all that debris up. Well, now you don't have to be an architect or engineer to see that this wall is collapsing. If you go in the center of it on the west side, it's really bad. If you go on Camp Street on top, and I know it's not our responsibility, it's the railroad, but maybe we got to honk a horn that way. Camp Street and Hayes Ave on top, there's a lot of debris there.
Yeah.
A train went by, stones fall down, and that's how these cars are getting hit. It's not kids throwing them.
And through the commission president, Commissioner Waddington, that's exactly why we put a chunk in for the underpass. Now, $500,000 will only go so far, but it's not something we've done, or the underpasses before. We're hoping to be able to leverage that to attract other funding as possible, but we agree Tiffin's and Shambles and the other ones need deferred maintenance, and even Columbus, which was the most recent one to see investments, we're already seeing some signs of wear and tear there. So the underpasses are very important, and this is a down payment on what is needed at those, but we're certainly taking it seriously, and I know Josh has been working hard under Aaron to put together a plan for each of the underpasses.
I understand that it's our entryways in the community, majority of it. And if I recall, Mr. Murray, years ago, when you helped on some of the cleanups, you saw what was going on in the walls and that deteriorating. Isn't that the railroad's responsibility? The tracks are going over, and that's, you know.
I'm going to defer to our legal counsel because I don't know the answer to the question.
I would think, you know.
If I may, some of it is likely the railroad's responsibility, where the property starts and stops. The actual bridge is usually the railroad's, and it just depends on how much of the walls are theirs versus ours.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment relative to that underpass. You know, the city has come to the MPO over different periods of time to try to get that funded. And the issue has always been, it goes back to the railroad.
Yeah.
And ODOT won't fund it because it's not there. So, yeah, it's a tough situation.
And that's through the Commission President, Commissioner Pajali. That's exactly why. We actually had a bigger number there, but because of eligibility issues, we had to move some of it out because it's not one that is expressly funded, and there's only so much funding for the non-expressly stated pieces. But I think at one point we had 1.2 million in there for the underpasses, and we went down to 5 because that was the amount that we could justify. But we want to get that down payment and then keep planning from there.
And maybe if we can get, if we can put that funding out there, maybe we approach the railroad and say, look, we want your commitment to do your end of things also.
Absolutely.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole?
with regard to the distribution on this slide, and this is a good place to start, there's only $700,000 left to spend on streets and transportation. If you've already spent 4.7 out of 5.5, it only leaves 7.2.
Sorry, through the Commission President to Commissioner Poole, we've actually spent a little over 2 million on local streets. We have about 3 million left to spend. A big portion that's under contract for this coming year, and then an additional average of $1 million for 23 and 24. So we're about 40% through. Of that 4.785 million, there's some other, I actually have the list of what's been spent. So 2 million previously spent on streets, 1 million that we will spend on this year, but which is allocated, 150,000 for the South Side Plan, 30,000 for OGO Victory Kitchen and Care and Share, 100,000 for the Good Time, 800,000 for the design of the Justice Center, 125,000 that went to staff level support to offset salaries while we were losing money, and then an employee retention bonus, which made up what employees lost the year that they took voluntary. So all those add up to the 4.75, but actually of what's out the door, of that 5.5 million, only about 2 million, with an additional $1 million allocated that people will see go into the streets this year. And
I understand about this year. I'm talking about how much work gets done. Okay, we've been working on these on streets and allocating money through various sources over the past multiple years. We then get a $9 million windfall or $18 million windfall, of which is showing 5.5 million is going to go for streets. Well, we've already fixed the streets with essentially most of that 4.785. The point I'm making is we're not getting enough done on streets with all these other wished for expenditures. And that's really what the issue for me. Likewise, without having a printout that identifies what projects you're doing within those different colored assets, there's no way for me to make a decision whether or not I think it's the best for the community or not. This spreading of the money, it may be good, it may not be. Once we find out how much it costs to do underpasses or rec center or whatever it is you choose, we may find that it takes too much of the money and we need to move these numbers around. So I just don't want to go forward with you thinking, from my perspective, that this is okay and just move with the projects you've got, because you've not presented us any projects, just broad general places that you'd like to spend money. The last thing is, for the future, when staff gives presentations, I'd like a print copy of it before it goes through, because actually can't remember anything you said, much of what you said. I mean, we're trying to process this cold, something you folks have been working on for a year and a half. And so what's on the next slide, I don't even remember.
No,
So I appreciate that. I appreciate that with all your presentations. That would be nice. And likewise, if you get me a copy of this when we're done.
Through the Commission President.
But otherwise, thank you for your work.
Oh, yeah.
This is fine, but I need more details.
Your point is well taken, and we'll get the printed copies in the future, and we'll make sure we email this around by tomorrow morning as well.
Thanks.
I would think, Mr. Webster, that this, what you presented to us, I am pleased with it. When I quickly count up the dollar volume here, it appears to me that more than 70% of these dollars are being spent directly for the benefit of our neighborhoods and directly for the benefit of our residents. I'm pleased, I'm certainly pleased to see that. And I perceive this presentation that you've done tonight as a broad outline of where these dollars are going. I never expected you to show up here and say, broken down in $1,000 increments, what specific projects they're going into. So this is exactly what I've been looking for since we were fortunate to get the $18 million. And I am very supportive of the categories that you've chosen and the direction that we think these are going. And I will reemphasize something that you said just moments ago, and that is that every one of these dollars are going to come back to this commission for their approval. We're not in a position, or will ever be in a position, to give you a blanket authority to spend $18 million. Every one of these dollars we will get to see again in very specific segments.
Absolutely.
So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Marina.
So a couple thoughts. One, really appreciate the thoughtful way that you've gone about putting this together. Too many communities just jumped forward right away and said, here's our wish list, and we want the candy, and this is great, and we're going to spend it. And instead of coming up with a plan that's going to support, I believe, what you presented the entire community, including the investments in some of our other institutions. We have the same constituency. Why not make those investments in those constituencies? I think that's great. And I want to say, and this is not to correct Mr. Poole at all, we have used the word sometimes windfall. Let me tell you, this money is not a windfall for the city of Sandusky. The state and federal governments have been disinvesting in cities for decades. It's wrong, it's immoral, it's hurtful to the people who live in this community, and it should stop. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to correct a little bit of that, and we are doing that. And I have looked at the trajectory that we've been on now for the last 8 years, since you got here, since I came back for the second time, and I must say at the time I had no idea why I was coming back for a second time. I think Brady dared me into doing it. But the trajectory that we've been on has been one of taking care of things, as you indicated, Mr. Wobser, that we had neglected for decades, not just a couple of years. When you got here and when I got here the first time and the second time, we had trucks that were held together with duct tape and baling wire. Today, we see, for example, the public saying, you guys did a really good job after the snowstorm. Well, guess what? We've got good equipment now. We can take care of these things. We're not getting those complaints because we can take care of these things. That's good for the public. It's good for our citizens. It's good for the future of this city. We have methodically gone through so many of the assets that we have, the buildings and the parks and the vehicles, and we've replaced those and we brought them back up to a modern standard. And when we leave at some point in time, and we all will, we will be able to look back and say we did right by this community. We restored those investments so that the people doing the work can do the right work for the people who are entitled to that work. So I really want to thank you for what I think is a good plan. I recognize that we're going to have to vote on each and every piece of this going forward. I look forward to those debates, but this is a good place to kick it off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner.
I was wondering, Mr. Wobser, are you able to provide us maybe with like a ballpark figure or allocation for like that affordable housing piece in particular?
Yeah, so through the commission president to Commissioner Harris, everything is an estimate at this point, but I believe that the affordable housing piece is in for nearly 1.2 million. Is that right, Director Reeder?
That's right.
I think it's 1.2. So, and that is meant to be like a per unit support for those applying for state and federal funds. We're particularly looking at the potential for placing those into the conversion of one of the schools that's no longer being used into an apartment building, which we know is going to be a very difficult project, but it would have the dual benefit of providing affordable housing, but also taking a historic building that anchors a neighborhood, say the Osborne School, for example, and allowing that to be repurposed and saved, but in a way that helps meet our affordable housing needs. We can't guarantee that that will be the project, but there's a small list of potential projects that sits at the top of that we know are going to need financial support to be economically viable. And so that's the example, the type of project that we hope to be able to bring back to the commission over the next few years.
Awesome, thanks.
Additional comments, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Mike?
Thank you for dividing it up, and let's look at this as well. But my focus, my recommendation, or Mr. Poole's looking at streets. I'd like to, and you mentioned revisiting the master plan. I'd really like to see us really focus on the master plan as we spend money going forward. And let's pick recreation revitalization. You had the bike path in there. So I really think we started that, and we had to focus on finishing that to prove that we finish what we start. And I just noticed that the pool and the tennis courts and things are thrown in with it. We haven't finished the bike path. And I thought that we had funding coming forward from the Cedar Point taxes to address those bullet points of recreation. So I don't need the minutia right now. That's just going forward. I was thinking that.
If I really could briefly just respond to that through the commission president to Commissioner Meinzer, I agree completely. But I will say that the skate park and the tennis courts in particular have long been a part of the 5-year capital plan that we've been working on. And we know they're well past their existing useful life. So we've been looking for that kind of unique opportunity to fund those. But the pathway is represented with a pretty significant piece of funding in this. And then in addition to that, you mentioned the Cedar Point deal, and this kind of builds on Commission Vice President Murray's statement too, is that the things that you see funded with regularly committed funded out of issue 8, which was the first time this really commission stepped forward and helped provide new revenue to the city to help us climb out of some of those decades-long challenges that we've discussed earlier. And then secondarily, the Cedar Point agreement actually does have an annual allocation of $500,000 a year specifically for the pathway, which is why we were able to focus the estimated million that we're putting into the pathway from this 18 million into hopefully right-of-way acquisition. So we really have tried to fit the puzzle pieces together from issue 8 in the bicentennial vision plan, from the Cedar Point deal, which was really grew out of the bicentennial vision plan, and now finally with these funds. And so I think what it does is potentially puts us in a great position as we continue the update of the strategic plan this year to say, okay, how do we build and layer onto that success going forward? But we really were cognizant of the different pieces. And so while you may not see something specifically at a large level here, it's probably because it is included, like the pathway, in the Cedar Point agreement already. So
thank you.
Additional comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, just one. As you move forward with this, I'm hoping that we're going to see the entire package of how you want to spend this money. Because what I foresee is we have a long list of things that I'm not sure we have enough money to do them all very well or right. And as opposed to bringing us one project at a time that we go, yeah, we like that. And then at the end, finding out that we didn't prioritize very well and the money's all spent. Long before you want us to approve this, I'd like to see the package.
Certainly.
The entire $18 million, what we're going to spend it on so that we're able to deliberate between the decisions, the recommendations that you make about what to spend the money on. As you have the details of what you think's going on. I'm looking at this and all the things you have on there. I don't see us being able to do very many things very well. Just as is, we're going to have to make some decisions and don't want to wait and say, oh, we're at the last minute, we have to pass whatever's in front of us.
Sure.
Okay. Is there a deadline someplace in here where you have to have a final decision from us on what we do to make your 2024 so that we can back up to where we expect you to present us something?
Through the commission president, Commissioner Poole, we do not need a specific ratification of this broader concept from the commission necessarily. What we're looking for, though, is that we're moving in the right direction and in line with what the commission would like to see so that we can start bringing more detailed projects forward by 2024. So the deadline is still 2024, but as you know, the City Hall is a great example. I remember beginning working on this immediately after the passage of issue 8, and it was almost exactly 4 years to the day that we moved in. And so some of these larger scale projects can take that 3-4 year period. We don't have to have everything finished the construction by the end of 2024, but it does have to be legally contracted by the end of 2024 and finished by the end of 2026. So we're really looking at that 4-year horizon, two years to lock in a contract and then an additional 2 years for construction.
Okay, I think I probably wasn't very clear. What I'm looking for is, when can we expect, or could we get a timeline from you that says when we will have to make our final decision so that you can get your contracts in and so forth, so that we can identify, have some time to talk about whatever it is you present. And if you don't have an idea yet, that's fine, but that's really what I'm looking for.
So,
when can we expect you to come to us with enough information that we can make a decision what's good and still have time for you to make your...
Through the commission president to Commissioner Poole, we have a slightly more detailed version of this plan, which is how I knew about the 1.1, 1.2 million, whatever it is for housing, that we can share with the commission to give you. And again, those aren't meant to be to the cent, but it's meant to give you a sense of how we hope to allocate. But our goal was to be able to begin, again, layering with existing city resources, layering with things like the Cedar Point dollars, to begin working on the projects with this going forward, and then bringing each project back on a case-by-case basis, but not necessarily to come back in this big of a picture way with the stimulus dollars. So if there is additional detail beyond us sending you what we have here, and we can take feedback there, our plan was to get moving with the general spirit of this is the direction that the commission wants to go.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Murray.
Very briefly, Mr. Poole makes an excellent point about us not wanting to do something on a half-baked way. And what we have found rather consistently over the last 8 years is that if we have a plan, we will find the funding sooner or later if we're committed to it. And to have the plan is to attract the other funding from outside sources. If we don't have the plan, if we didn't have the plan for the pathway, we never would have found the parts and pieces that we have so far. So I continue to believe that this process of developing the plan and then finding the funding, in a way, it almost sounds backwards, but it's exactly the right way in order to be able to maximize the dollars that we have. And I see in a lot of these instances, we're making an investment that's going to attract other investment or close the gap in some existing plan and financing package that we have put together. So great point. We've got to do it the right way, but it's a complicated process. It's been demonstrated over the last 8 years.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner? If not, thank you, Mr. Whip.
Thank you.
Commissioners, you have before you several communications from staff recommending various pieces of legislation. Can I have a motion to accept these communications?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second discussion. Without objection, the motion be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, we have 3 items on the consent agenda this evening. Any of you wish to move any of those consent items to the regular agenda?
Mr. Chairman, item B.
Item B will go to the regular agenda. Ms. Myers, will you present the consent agenda less item B?
Yes, Mr. President. Item A, transfer ownership liquor license to Chill Place LLC. Item C, budget amendment number 1.
Commissioners, having heard these ordinance resolutions, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
I move to approve the transfer of the liquor license in item A and to approve the ordinance in item C pursuant to section 14 of the city's charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance and liquor permit.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That ordinance and liquor permit is passed. Ms. Myers, will you present item B, please?
It is requested a resolution be passed authorizing the filing of a grant application with the U.S. Department of Transportation for discretionary state funding through the fiscal year 2022, Rebuilding America Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, the RAISE Grant Program for the Sandusky Bay Pathway, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Watt.
I move that we adopt this resolution under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
I just wanted the engineer or someone to talk about $29 million for this bike path. It's a pretty big number, and I'm trying to understand how we're paying our share and what happens if we don't get this $22 million from this grant. We reach a point here where I'm just not comfortable with $1 million a mile for a bicycle path.
Through the commission president to Commissioner Poole, and this gets to Commission Vice President Murray's point as to having a plan in place and then kind of looking to find the funding for it piece by piece. There's a variety of ways in which we intend to fund the pathway project, the largest of which is through tax increment financing on the construction of the Cedar Point Sports Center project. But we've also opportunistically, through things like the Chesapeake TIF funding the Shoreline Drive, through the Meg Street project funding that piece, through the Venice Road project funding that piece, East Water Street's being funded in a similar way. So what we are trying to do is creatively find sources like the Sports Center TIF for that section. And then now we have a regular revenue stream in addition to our own capital resources from the Cedar Point deal, but to continue to piece by piece, look for federal funding, look for state funding. I think we received $750,000 from the last state capital budget, for example, but we're just trying to go out there and chase down the money. But to Commissioner Murray's point, we wouldn't be in the position to do that had we not put the plan in place to begin with. So I don't know if Director Klein wants to build on that.
Just a little bit about the $29.9 million number that's in there. That includes a bridge over Cedar Point Drive to eliminate that pedestrian conflict at Cedar Point Drive and First Street. It also includes the pathway all the way back through Pier Track with the bridge that would go back behind Old City Hall at Battery Park. So this includes everything that was envisioned in the original concept in the original plan. Typically, if you ask for $30 million, there's no way you're going to get $30 million. So you include all those things and hope that you can get the vast majority of what you've applied for.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Poole.
My only comment is that if we can build the bike path for our share being $8 million, then all the things that have been just thrown out and proposed is fine. If that's going to be our only investment. Bridges across First Street and bridges across Pipe Creek are additional things for which spending additional city money for doesn't enhance the bicyclist experience on this at all. And likewise at Battery Park, same concept, if that's going to be growing into this also. So trying to get money from these people, I certainly support that. We've been turned down twice by the state, I understand, and for larger sums of money, and I just have some concerns, and I just want to go on the record that money that we take out of our general fund from the city's share to spend on this bike path is money we don't have to spend on other things, and at this point, this bike path is not the highest priority any longer for me. Would be nice to have, but it's like I'd like a new car, but truck I have is just fine for the amount of money it'll cost me to go into debt. So, thank you.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meisner.
I disagree with Mr. Poole. I think that this is something, if we could ever complete this, I heard it when it was in the first master plan, like I talked about, let's stay on track and try to get something at least completed on this. And it's going to take maybe decades. And if we can keep chipping it away from it, as I understand, it may not be a $29 or $28 million grant. You might just get a $10 million grant, correct? So we work on parcels of this. As long as we don't lose focus of what we set in place with the master plan, keep working toward it. I really think that this is something that, and you and I are never going to ride on it. I don't know, I wouldn't ride on it now. Heck, I can't even get on a bike hardly.
Speak for yourself.
But I think future generations, residents and family are going to be attracted. They're going to come and see something like that, and especially with gasoline and big trucks and cars. You're not going to, if you buy a big truck, you better get one that runs good mileage, because I think those days are going to be over soon. And there's going to be a lot more people using bike paths and walking paths and trying to get to stores and recreation things. So I like the idea of something, we lay the groundwork for 20 years down from the road, and we just keep working at it. So.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Pachel.
I think ODOT has set multimodal activities as a priority for quite a while now, so I think those are becoming more and more in favor. And Mr. Klein, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this like a one-shot deal with this pot of money? It replaces the Tiger grant. This RAISE grant is a new grant that's out there because of the stimulus money and those types of things.
Through the commission president, my understanding, we applied for the RAISE grant last year. It does replace the Tiger, and then I think in between it may have been called Invest. So I don't believe it's a one-shot deal, but I don't know if it's going to be coming back next year. They never tell you if it's going to be coming back in future years. And right now, we're hoping to get our foot in the door because they said you did such a good job in the past that we want to reevaluate this. You needed a couple more things and that you can look into it on the same application.
I think the county is going to apply for some money to do that entire corridor. So I think if you look at it from a holistic approach, I mean, it might favor us trying to get this money, and I just think it's the smart move. Why wouldn't we apply?
Yep, exactly.
Oh, we should apply.
If I could, through the Commission President, Commissioner Pachali, we're actually part of the county's application, and there's a segment between Cedar Point Drive to the Sports Center that is a part of that. So we're supporting both applications and hoping that one or both are able to receive some funding.
Mr. Klein, I expect you will wear out more than one pen applying for grants before we're done with this pathway. That's how these things work. And you're absolutely right. We don't expect to get $29,930,000 out of this, but whatever we get, we may end up having, I don't know, bake sales and car washes to finish it off if we have to. But there's going to be a lot of other opportunities for us to find ways to fund this, and we've got a plan, and I applaud you for taking the time to fill this out, and I know you've had some conversations with the people we're dealing with, and we can only hope that we do well with it. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, you call the roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That resolution is passed. Ms. Myers, you present formally item number 1.
It is requested an ordinance be passed amending Part 7 Business Regulation Code, Chapter 735, Public Vendors of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Sandusky in a manner and way specifically set forth herein below.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meinzer.
I move that we accept this budgetary information and as an ordinance and be passed along with Part 7 of the Business Regulation Code.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. I believe there was a question regarding this specific piece of legislation. Ms. Blair, maybe you've already, I wonder if you could answer that question regarding the fees associated with this piece of legislation.
Thank you, Commission President Brady. First off, I want to say that we want it to be easier to operate as a vendor in the city of Sandusky. We're seeing more and more entrepreneurs interested in doing that, and it's a low barrier to entry to starting a business, to experiment with a table, maybe move up to a trailer, move up to a food truck, something like that. Currently, there's only 2 levels of fee structure in our ordinance. So one is $250 to operate in the city overall and $350 to reserve a space. That's actually a lot higher than a lot of other cities. We'd like to reduce the baseline fee to register as a vendor, so someone selling jewelry at a table doesn't have to pay $250 to operate in the city. The reason why we think it makes the most sense to take it away from the ordinance and leave it to staff to the annual program to designate, is that will allow us some room to grow and determine the right program for our vendor community annually, especially amidst so much change and growth in the community with the Pier project. We're going to add electric to a couple other parks, and we expect to see vendors' interest in operating there. So in order to be flexible and answer to the vendor community on an annual basis and not have to come back to you for legislation, that's the reason why we recommend that change.
Thank you. Commissioners, comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have
Commissioner
a comment. A vendor truck, say if they're there pretty much all the year on the Jack Street Pier, when I read that in the events, then do they have to move or do they pay another fee?
Right now, the Jackson Street Pier is only available to 4 total vendors. We would like to expand that to more, being allowed to be on the pier. But to answer your question specifically, the vendors that reserve their space on the pier are allowed to operate there all year during regular hours, except for special events. And that's how the ordinance has been. It was just, the definition was odd, and we clarified it in this update. So we're not changing that really. It's just that we changed the definition to be a lot more clear of how that works.
Okay, thank you.
Additional comments or questions?
Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
I thought it was a good updating of the ordinance. Times have changed, and the way people do business have changed since we last adopted this ordinance. I don't think I was here at that point in time. It was further back than that. And so I think we're in the share economy now. That's just where we are. That's where we're going to be for a long time. This fits right into that. It's a great place for a new business to start a business and experience the possibility of growth. And I think that will eventually redound to the community's benefit. So thanks for this suggestion.
Mr. Chairman, I also agree the update was very nice, except for a couple of details it asked. You talked about in answer to Commissioner Waddington's question, you answered in the form talking about Jackson Street Pier. The ordinance, I'm under the impression, covers the entire community.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't necessarily agree that, if I understand how vendors work, if a vendor is parked someplace in the city, let's ignore Jackson Street Pier, and they're there they buy a slip, reserve a spot, right? And they're there every week, every day, or whatever. Is that designed into the license, how often they're going to be there routinely?
Through the commission chair, what this, to Commissioner Poole, this would allow, it specifies that each of those vendor license can be flexible to that existing context, because to your point, this has to function for all those different types of businesses, all the different places in our city. The pier gets a lot of attention, a lot of people wanting to be there, but there's other places in the city where someone wants to be. So the annual program that we would release, what we're planning to release, is to allow a lot of spaces on first come, first served basis. There's a lot of vendors. And for some context, we talk to every single vendor we know that has operated in the city. Jason and I talked to all of them one-on-one just to gather a lot of feedback for this. But we'd like to allow vendors to operate on a first come, first served. So if they want to be in this neighborhood on this day, or in this park or in this location, we will put out a map, just like it has been for years, put out an annual map of those allowable vendor locations that are first come, first served. Some vendors really want to reserve a space, and so if they reserve a space, that's a specific fee, and then in their vendor license, it shows where they're going to park and what their reserved space is, so other vendors can't operate in that space. And our map would also show that these are reserved spaces and these are first come, first served spaces.
How are we going to manage fistfights over first come, first served spaces? Are you anticipating, and that's possibly way down the road. Currently, these are baby steps, and so competition for vending space is probably not going to be an issue. So maybe I'll just belay that and not worry about it yet, but I do recognize first come, first serve it starts vending wars. What's the percentage of reserved? I mean, see if we had enough information here. Where are your reserved places and where are your expectations for first come, first serve? Do you have that someplace for us?
Through the chair to Mr. Poole, we have had that I don't know if it's been on a map of like which ones are allowed where. The only reserve spaces, to my knowledge, are the 4 on the pier last year. Those were the ones that were most sought after. And then there's the Bates Farm that's down on Jackson Street. They had a reserve space. I think that's who that is. Or there's a vendor in the parking lot at the end of Jackson. They were, thank you.
I remember that. Okay.
And those are, to my knowledge, the ones that had a reserve space in the past.
Okay, let me suggest this. I do not support the concept of our regular vendors in reserve spaces that they use every day, that we use them to bring people downtown, that if somebody shows up from out of town with a special event, that we kick our vendors out. I don't find that appropriate at all.
If I'm, sorry. If I may,
Sure,
Commission
jump in.
President, we currently don't allow vendors to operate during special events.
I realize you don't, and it's.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. That is not a change, that is just a continuation of the current ordinance.
Okay, whether it's a change or not, it has nothing to do with the fact I find the practice and I don't support the practice. Folks that are local, that invest in these vehicles and build up a business downtown or wherever it is, wherever their location is, because somebody throws a block party or a wine festival or whatever, I'd like to explore why you think we should tell them that they have to abandon their livelihood. Now, there's ways to talk around this in terms of number of days, perhaps. Perhaps if it's a over 5-day event, you might say something about it where they have to pay 50% of the event's charges for vendors. But the idea of folks pulling up here with wagons from out of town and us putting people out of work that support us good times and bad doesn't make any sense. If you're doing an event and your event's not big enough that you can make enough money that you can deal with our regular vendors, not just vendors, regular people that support this community, then perhaps you're not well planned. We don't tell the restaurants they can't sell food or hot dogs. Restaurants don't have to stop selling what they sell. So if we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, then equity means that we hold our vendor business people with the same high regard that we do everyone else.
Mr. Whoops, you have a comment?
Through the Commission President, just in response to Commissioner Poole, we do want to, as often as possible, allow those vendors that are here on a regular basis, but we do have some pre-existing events. Bike Week's a good example, where the event is actually free to the public, and they spend a significant amount of money to provide free programming to the public, and the only way that they make money is off the vending. And so if we weren't able to provide them with opportunities to run, they would likely just say we're not going to bring the entertainment. And so it's a very good discussion for the commission to have, and we don't know the exact right answer, but just keep in mind you're not going to necessarily have entities that pay to bring programming to the community if they're not able to also use that longstanding special event policy to generate revenue for themselves outside of the free programming.
Mr. Chairman, may I reply? With regard to Jackson Street Pier, I recognize that as the way it's laid out as a special area, that if you wrote some regulation that did some limitation with the use of Jackson Street Pier, that would make sense. The concept that Bike Week is going to disappear because the guy selling barbecue next to Fedderson's is still there, just doesn't make sense. There's not enough vendors downtown, and I'm talking about the whole city, but downtown, as you've already explained, there's only 1 or 2 places down here. And the suggestion that Bike Week is going to collapse because we have 2 vendors downtown off of Jackson Street Pier that aren't paying, it doesn't make, that he's going to take his Bike Week elsewhere, it doesn't make sense to me. And again, I hold these vendors with the same regard as I do other vendors, whether it's brick and mortar or not. Now, simple as that. So if this is on first reading, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's something I have that's something I have for me to pass this, I need to have addressed that takes better care of those folks, because they're here whether there's good business or not. And I'll point out, they make their money off of people that are downtown, that are already down here, or that they build up a business that people drive downtown to spend money there. Bike Week didn't bring those people. They're already here. And those business, we need to show them some respect.
If I may, Commission President, to kind of clarify some of this, this is actually fully designed, the whole revamp is to be much more friendly and understanding to our vendors. Currently, if a small vendor who sells small wares, a $250 fee would be maybe cost prohibitive. The look, the revamp, and then in the one area where we've historically allowed for some special events that are in a specifically designed area that block off streets to not allow vending during very limited periods of time, that's always been the case. And the rest of this ordinance is actually really well crafted by our chief planner, myself a little bit, but mostly our chief planner, to really think about how do we create a very flexible, very business-friendly, very good licensing regime that allows a multitude of vendors to operate in different conditions and to thrive. And so I think that if you look at the entire ordinance, it really is meant to address all of those concerns that Commissioner Poole is raising.
If I may add, through the chair to Mr. Poole, two things. One, I think it's really, I don't know if any of you all have helped plan special events. I have helped plan a large festival for multiple years. I was on the board, and the footprint of your special event space is important, and the logistics are huge. Where you're going to put the vendors, where you're going to put the workshops, where the lines are, people are going to queue up, and how many bathrooms you need. There's a lot of planning that goes into a special event. So the ability to allow our special event producers to have an open footprint to create their special event and bring that business to the city is really important. So I would encourage you to help preserve the special event spaces for those event producers, because they too are bringing a lot of money into the city. They often ask for the vendor list of all our contacts so they can reach out to our normal vendors and invite them in. We didn't hear, another comment, we didn't hear any from the existing vendors that it was a problem about the special event barrier. So that was not something that we heard from our current vendors. They're operating, 360 days or 200 days or whatever. They have a lot of access to their space. The other thing I would mention is that the previous ordinance was silent on whether an existing license holder that had a reserved space was allowed to operate anywhere else. It was generally assumed that was their space and their only potential to operate. The changes that we've made opens that up. So if the special event is taking up their space, they can go to any of the other first come, first served spaces. So we're not barring them from doing business in the city for that weekend. They might say, hey, let's go see, let's go test out another spot since I can't be on the pier. Or I know if I can't be on the pier and a bunch of people are going to park on Jackson Street, maybe I'll see if I can park in a parking spot over there, and then I'll catch a bunch of people right outside the special event boundary. So it doesn't bar them from doing business during those special events and taking advantage of those customers that are in town.
Mr. Mars, Commissioner Byers.
Chairman, yeah, that helped, the last two comments. I thought I was okay with this, and I started getting confused. So just the barbecue guy out on Depot Street, or the food truck at the Bait House, they can continue to operate regardless of any special events or anything going on. They don't get, they don't have to stop. If they want to move into that area, then they just have to pay a new license to get within that boundary. And I also read for these entrepreneurs or these new vendors, if they feel slighted and they don't get chosen as a preferred, not first come, first served, they can appeal to the Planning Commission. So there is an avenue for recourse if they feel that for some reason that somebody got a favoritism or something. So I'm okay with it. Thank you.
Ms. Mars, you call the roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
Mr. Murray?
Point of order.
First reading.
First reading. So what are we voting on right now? We're voting on the ordinance or the motion?
You just vote on the motion.
We just voted on the motion.
So the vote on the motion is void.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That passes on first reading. It'll come back to us again. Ms. Myers, you present the next item on the agenda.
Yes, Mr. President. It is requested an ordinance be passed amending the official zone map of the city of Sandusky to expand the transient occupancy overlay district to include parcel number 56-00584 located at 629 East Adams Street, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect under suspension of the rules as contained in and in accordance with Section 13 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
move for the adoption of this ordinance pursuant to Section 13 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Myers, will you poll the commission, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, will you present item number 3, please?
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested a resolution be passed declaring the necessity for the city to proceed with the proposed Justice Center Rooftop Air Handling Unit project, approving the specifications and engineer's estimate of cost thereof, and directing the city manager to advertise for and receive bids in relation thereto, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meinzer.
make a motion to pass this resolution and declare this resolution take immediate effect in Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Mr. Klein, can you give us some explanation of what we're doing here and the value of this piece of construction?
Yes, sir, Mr. President. As you all are aware, a lot of the equipment, if not all of it, at the old City Hall is really out of date. And unfortunately, one of the air handling units that we have at the facility that cools the IT room, the detectives area, and a portion of the court and the judges area failed a couple months back. And so what we need to do is we need to replace that. We were hoping that we would be able to buy time, work it into the future project. But what we're able to do is to purchase a unit that can be built into the future project. So this unit that we're buying now will stay when we reconstruct the facility later. One point is also going to be that the contractor is going to ensure that the existing, that this piece of equipment during construction and after construction is cleaned and brought back up to new standards so that, all the dust and debris from demolition will not be in the filters. So.
Comments or questions, Commissioner? Looks like we don't have much of a choice here, do we, Mr. Klein?
Unfortunately not.
Ms. Myers, you call the roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That resolution is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 4, please.
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested a resolution be passed amending Section 1 of Resolution Number 14-13R, passed on April 8, 2013, authorizing limited seasonal dockage at the Paper District Marina, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meinzer.
I request that we move on this resolution and it should be passed and shall take effect in full accordance with Section 14 City Charter.
Been a motion, I do not hear a second. There's not a second, this resolution dies for lack of a second. Is that correct, Mr. Heil?
Yes.
Ms. Myers, you present item number 5, please.
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested an ordinance be passed declaring a 1992 Brush Bandit 250 chipper as unnecessary and unfit for the city use pursuant to Section 25 of the city charter, authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase a Vermeer brush chipper from Vermeer All Roads of Findlay, Ohio, through the State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services Cooperative Purchasing Program for the Forestry Division, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move that we adopt this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you poll the commission on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, will you present item number 6, please?
It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase a new Kubota U-Series mini excavator from Strucker Tractor Sales of Fremont, Ohio, through the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchasing Program for the Water Distribution Division, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Harris.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Klein.
Yeah, unfortunately, I noticed today that I had the wrong funding source in the agenda item. It states in there that it would be paid for out of the American Rescue Plan Act stimulus funds, but it's actually intended to be paid for out of water funds. So if we could get an amendment to the motion, or however that needs to work, the intent was to have this out of the water funds.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to amend. Ms. Myers, will you call a roll on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed, and that ordinance is amended to correct the funding source. Ms. Myers, will you call a roll on the ordinance, please?
It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager.
Ms. Myers, I think we just have to, don't we have to call a roll on that motion? Item 6.
Amendment here before.
On the amendment?
We did the amendment.
We did the
No,
amendment
we
before.
passed the
Yeah.
amendment.
I believe the
We're
amendment
now-
was passed, but we still need to pass the ordinance as amended.
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Commissioners, item number 7, I am going to ask for a motion that item number 7 be tabled, as there are still specific questions that staff has not received answers to from the applicant.
So moved.
Second.
Regarding design and specifications of the building. Did I hear a motion? I think I had a motion in a second.
Yeah.
Discussion? Ms. Myers, will you call a roll on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Abstain.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed and that legislation is tabled. Concludes our regular agenda. We'll turn to our city manager for his report.
Thank you, Commission President, Commissioner, audience, staff. I'll start with donations. First, the Sandusky Police Department was recently awarded $1,000 from the Colonel Joseph E. Pitsy Donor Advised Fund of the Columbus Foundation to purchase equipment and uniforms for youth sports programs that our community impact officers are coordinating. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion? Without objection, that motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Great. Moving on to code compliance, the annual notification has been published in the Sandusky Register to comply with Section 531.08 of the codified ordinances of Sandusky. This ordinance requires the owner occupant having the care of any lot or land within the city to cut down and remove all noxious weeds and grass of a height of 8 inches or more. Property is found to be in violation will be served with a written notice posted on the property, and failure to comply with this notice within 5 days from the date of the notice will result in the city causing such weeds and grass to be cut and removed. Such cutting and removing shall be at the owner's expense. Voluntary cooperation by all property owners is appreciated. Moving on to fire, Sandusky Fire is partnered with Erie County Health Department to assist victims of opioid overdoses to connect with drug abuse treatment programs. Through this partnership, Sandusky EMTs and paramedics will provide information to the County Health Department's drug overdose response teams, allowing them to assist in treatment options for overdose victims. They will also provide victims with naloxone leave-behind kits containing Narcan and informational materials directing those overdose victims to medical treatment. For finance, due to Emancipation Day, the municipal income tax filing deadline for 2021 income regional tax returns is April 18th, 2022. All individuals and businesses can utilize RITA's website at ritaohio.com to file their taxes. RITA has also extended the hours for their call center through the filing deadline to assist taxpayers. For Public Works, first of all, Director Klein notified that the local street resurfacing program should begin milling next week, so you'll be seeing a lot of orange barrels scattered throughout town, but that's more progress through all the paving work that this commission has helped make possible over the last few years. Also, trash receptacles have been placed at all city properties for use by park patrons, and Republic has begun implementation of the summer pickup schedule. Unfortunately, we've already received an increased number of complaints that residents are disposing of normal household refuse bags in the bins, and we've seen an increase in non-recyclables being disposed of in recycling bins at the service center. This misuse leads to cost increase for residents and reduces available capacity for park users, and each incident will be turned over to SPD or the police department for video review and follow-up. Also, it's time to spring clean Sandusky as we get ready to enjoy summer and welcome back visitors. We're launching a new community cleanup and beautification series, Love Where You Live, that will include the following events: neighborhood cleanups that are taking place in various areas throughout the city every Saturday until October, thanks to Commission Waddington. I believe they had the first one of those this previous weekend. Also, residents are welcome to drop off yard waste at Barnes Nursery at 1630 Camp Road in Huron on Saturday, May 7th from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and on Sunday, May 8th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. For further details about these events, please visit our website or contact 419-627-5829. Also, various divisions have begun seasonal prep throughout the city. This includes installation of docks and buoys, as well as traffic calming measures for state routes and neighborhoods, activation of drinking fountains, and operation of restrooms, more frequent waste collection in the downtown business district. To report an issue or for questions or concerns, please call 419-627-5829. Crews at Oakland Cemetery will be conducting spring cleanup on Monday, April 18th. All items placed at grave sites during the fall and winter months will be removed, and no artificial flowers will be permitted for spring and summer months. Also, Garner Sanitation has begun placing portable restrooms on city properties as per the schedule in the contract. Others will be arriving in May and June. And the Division of Water Distribution will commence flushing fire hydrants within the city starting on the 18th with periodic flushing of water mains that's required to ensure a high quality of water. Crews will move through zones in consecutive order, starting with Zone 1. It takes about 1 week to complete each zone. All questions about hydrant flushing and water quality can be directed to Big Island at 419-627-5805. Then I have a few for community development through the city's fair housing program. 3 free trainings will be held at the library in April. Landlord training events will be held on the 22nd at 2 p.m. and on April 25th at 4 p.m. And a fair housing clinic for tenants will be held on April 22nd at 3:30 p.m. Registration is not required. If there are questions, please call 1-800-850-0467. And the Community Development Block Grant Program is soliciting applications for grant funding of food pantry-related community projects with applications due on May 6. Applications are available online at Community Development's webpage and at City Hall. Questions can be directed to Nicole Growy at 419-627-5730.
And finally, for Sandusky Transit, ODOT has selected Sandusky Transit to receive grant funding to complete a transportation development strategic plan. The plan will identify various options for improved public transportation in Greater Sandusky. RLS and Associates will lead the planning effort. The scope of the project will be divided into 2 phases, with the first being April 1st through June 30th, and will include documentation of existing conditions, peer system review, and initial stakeholder engagement, with phase 2, which is through July through December of this year, would encompass the development of alternatives, public input, and an implementation plan. Jonathan, do we need a motion to approve that grant?
No, we don't.
Okay, so that's just an update, and that concludes my remarks for this evening, but I'm happy to
Thank you,
take any
Mr.
questions
Webster.
or
Any
comments.
questions or comments for the city manager?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Waddington.
I'm thrilled to see when I drove by Crimus, I almost crashed, that we finally got some work in there because the 2 gentlemen from Santa Monica, I don't know if they were doing any follow through on that. It seemed like that was just, it was COVID and it was something else, but it's good to see some bodies in there working now. And maybe we will get a little grocery store again downtown. That's my hope, that maybe part of it would be that. So that's exciting to see.
Commissioner Poole.
Yeah, with regard to the item 4 that we didn't do anything with, Paper District Marina, just would like the staff to get back with us. What Mr. Murray presented was extremely powerful at the time, but it was brought to us ahead of time. We didn't have enough information in the documentation that you sent early on to make a decision that addressed his concern. So if the staff still thinks this is important to do, I'm open to hearing their answers to that. Answers to Tim's questions would be a place to start, and then the money. Why are we doing this? So,
Additional comments or questions for the city manager?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to mention that I was glad to see we got funding for that TDP, that Transit Development Plan. That's very important, and I know it hasn't been updated for a long time. And when you do apply for funding, they always ask, do you have an updated plan? And for years, we would have to say, no, it hasn't been updated. So that's important funding that we're about to receive.
That's great. Thank you.
Additional comments for city manager? Not, we'll move to items of old business. Any items of old business, Commissioner? Any items of new business, Commissioners? I have to ask for a motion to appoint Commissioner Meinzer to the Erie County Correction Planning Board.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you poll the commission on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That appointment is set. I will also ask for a motion to appoint Mr. Don Shira as an alternate to our Housing Code Board of Appeals where we have a vacancy.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you poll the commission on that motion?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That appointment is set. Any additional items of new business?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Murray.
I think I need to ask for 2 executive sessions, so I'll make a motion first to set an executive session for pending litigation.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you poll the commission on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That executive session is set.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Murray.
I need to make a motion to set an executive session for collective bargaining.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you poll the commission on that motion?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That executive session is set. Additional items of new business, commissioners? Any public comments on any item that pertains to city business? Please step to the podium and share with us your name and address, and tell us your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. I don't know if all 7 of you watched any of the other committee boards or meetings. I assume you do, but you're going to want to watch maybe a couple of times this past, the Planning Commission meeting where they discussed in depth the idea of transient overlay districts. And it sounds like the Planning Commission is highly in favor of developing additional overlay areas. The one out on Monroe Street keeps being discussed, and I think that's coming up at the next Planning Commission meeting. But there's discussion now of not only having transient overlay districts, but also having another number of transient rentals throughout the entire city of Sandusky. And the number that's being talked about, thrown out so far, is 500. And as this comes before this commission in the months to come, I want you to all consider the idea that every time you lose a home to 2 transient rentals, you're losing households in the city of Sandusky that are permanent residents. If you notice the last census we had, we were barely over to 25,000. So if we're looking at 500 transient rentals throughout the entire city, plus transient overlays, that impact could be significant when it comes to the next census. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwanger. Additional comments from the public regarding any item of city business?
Mr. Chairman, just in response to Mr. Schwanger, we are wrestling with all those issues. And like I said before, it's tough to get our arms around them. And we're cognizant of everything you've said. And I want to keep the integrity of the neighborhoods. But in some areas where you've got rental housing already, you're kind of splitting hairs, right? You can already rent a house. So if you do an overlay district, I mean, it's already allowed rental housing. Those are some of the issues. And I don't recall the 500 number. I know we threw out some numbers, but it was just for the sake of discussion. So, but we are working hard to address that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Poole?
Yeah, I have watched those meetings, and 500 was a high number that was part of the conversation. It wasn't that we could actually go that high. I did want to point out that my concern anyway with regard to transient rental, we started this with a good idea that we were going to try and bring up to date and get housing that was dilapidated and falling apart, vacant and so forth, and get people to spend money in it. It becomes a concern if you take this back to the Planning Commission when we begin doing transient overlays and putting people out of rentals so that they can become transient. That becomes complicated, not to mention the usual whether or not it's going to disrupt the neighborhood. That's something that really is difficult to wrestle with because it's a judgment call. But I don't see it as much of a judgment call when we're talking about putting residents out of their houses so that we can get more money as a transient rental. That I would hope that the Planning Commission doesn't have any problem drawing a line with that.
Mr. Chairman, I hope Mr. Poole shows up at the next meeting to express his opinion because that's what we want. We want to hear from everybody.
It's comfortable watching it on Zoom in my pajamas with my coffee.
I'm giving you
doing it from his couch.
I'm giving you an invitation.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
There are a lot of important questions here, but I would just caution against forming opinions without a full presentation from staff and allowing it to go through the full Planning Commission process. That's the way that we're going to get the best results. And I think these instantaneous gut reactions in this context are not helpful to reaching the best results. So I'd urge us to proceed down the orderly path.
Agreed. We will move into executive session once the room is cleared.
Audience.
You already did.
We did.
You already did.
Do we do it?
Well, you're going to do it upstairs.
Upstairs, yeah, let's.
Executive session.
Yeah. Okay, which one do you want to do first? You want me to sit down here?
I think you want to stay here and we'll do sewer mitigation.
Yeah, let's stay here.
And then we'll send you a signal and come up.
Okay, yeah, just text me.
Are we going
We got to stay till we come back.
Oh, you're the roll.
Yeah.
We're on. We're on.
What's that? I think we're waiting on a few more commissioners.
Commissioner Poole, Commissioner Wadding,
We're still debating.
and Commissioner Pajali.
Well, the elevator was full.
Is Dave? Will you all forgive me if I call roll in the incorrect order?
It's fine. We don't care.
My left ear.
We have returned from executive session. I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I would move to reject the fact-finding recommendations. If that's the right phraseology.
I second that motion.
Mr. Chairman, could we have a reason why you think we should, since you've made?
Discussion.
Discussion.
I believe that we are abdicating our position by not rejecting this due to several of the issues, but predominantly the staffing issue is my highest and deepest concern. I believe that this city gives up the ability to staff this fire department, that we are doing a disservice to the entire community.
Chairman.
Commissioner
I'm sorry, Mr. Poole.
No, go ahead.
So there are questions that we can address about appropriate staff levels. That is a question that is separate and apart from the question of whether staff levels should be set forth in the contract. I liken it to the following situation. I own a shop. I have 3 employees. Some of those employees have some businesses on the side, a little construction, a little lawn mowing, and they all decide to take vacation at the same time. Someone comes into my shop and says, Mr. Murray, what's wrong with you? All of your employees are out on vacation, or they're out on one thing or another at the same time. You don't have enough people in your shop. And the answer is, no, ma'am, I have plenty of people in my shop. So we go to fact finding, and the fact finder says to me, you know what the solution is? Instead of having 3 employees, you need to have 6 employees. And well, I only need 3 people. No, you need 6, so that all 3 of those people can go on vacation at the same time. What about the new 3? Well, they can go on vacation at the same time too. So that is what, and it's oversimplified, and I get that, but that is in effect what the fact finder has said to us with these findings of fact. I would encourage my colleagues to continue to negotiate in good faith with the fire union and find a solution that is good for the residents of Sandusky and good for the members of the fire station. I do not begrudge the firefighters one iota for seeking what they wanted in this contract. That is their right. That should be the right of every employee. But we, by the same token, are looking to have a disinterested person serve as the fact finder. We didn't get that in this instance. We did not get a rational fact finding, and I would therefore reject this.
Additional discussion,
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meisner.
Just to address Mr. Murray's comments, there's only 2 people could go on vacation at a time. That's never changed. I don't like a lot of things in the contract. I'm sure the firefighters don't like some things either, but I do like the fact that he recommends minimum manning, and been trying to get it minimum manning for years. We have doubled in run volume. We have run fire trucks with 2 people on them is definitely not safe. We've never come to an agreement with the city, and looking back during COVID, we had non-essential employees got to go home. The firefighters, when you used to think that COVID was going to kill you, had to go pick them all up and I mean, I believe that we should have addressed staffing and minimum manning a long time through work rules, however, we never did. Again, I don't like these personal days and certain things in here that we should have gotten back. Maybe Mario or Mr. Chief D'Amico, I'm too used to, can work on alternate means of staffing between now while he's brand new. He wasn't involved in negotiations. I'd like to start him off on the right foot, and I'm going to vote yes for it.
Additional comments, Commissioners?
Just to clarify, do you mean yes?
No, I'm going to vote yes for to accept the fact finder. I'm not voting no. What am I supposed to vote?
So before you have a motion.
Will you explain that?
Sure.
No, I just said, okay. Yeah.
Before you have a motion to reject the fact-finding report. A yes vote on that motion means you're voting to reject it. A no vote means you're voting to accept it.
Then I'm going to vote no. But I'm not voting right now. I'm just telling you what.
Can I ask a quick legal question?
Whoops.
Can Commissioner Meinzer vote on a contract whose son-in-law is a member of the union?
A son-in-law is not technically a close enough family member to cause an abstention, but an abstention would also be a no vote.
Got it.
Mr. Howell, will you poll the committee?
Wait, hang on, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me.
Mr. Murray's correct. The fact finders, we shouldn't probably give up our right to decide how many people are on the are working on the fire department. So that in and of itself is one thing. But I'm more concerned about the service provided to the community. And I'm not hearing anybody talk about correcting what I consider to be the problem, which is the staffing. And this is, that's what the trade-off here is. It sounds nice that everybody wants to have conversation, and we're going to do the best we can legally to talk some more about this. But the reality is there doesn't seem to be any movement toward bringing the fire department up to a reasonable staff. Is this something we have to vote on tonight?
Yes.
We have no choice.
We have no choice. We must return a decision within 7 days of receiving the fact-finding report.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
I could be mistaken, but I do not recall in the last 8 years anyone suggesting at the table that we should add additional firefighters. I just don't recall that coming up. I would have been happy to entertain the conversation, but I don't recall ever having that conversation.
Mr. Chairman, if the addition of other firefighters is a separate issue, is there some sort of guarantee that we could give that that issue would be addressed directly after we deal with this situation? I'm not saying tonight, but is there some sort of guarantee, like Mr. Poole said, not just give it lip service?
You say it so well.
I don't know the answer to that question. It is a.
I would think we could make a motion.
I think that Brennan, do we have the latitude? We don't have the latitude to amend this fact finder's.
Correct. You can either accept or reject the fact-finding report in front of you.
Then negotiations could move forward from there.
Yes, then negotiations can move forward from there. And to the extent, commission wants to set some policy tones for staff to follow, you can explore those for sure on staffing or other issues.
Well, if I could, through the commission president to the, to the commission, while what I can guarantee is that the administration will prioritize staffing levels and look for solutions outside of the contract that get us to the staffing levels that we all can mutually agree keep our firefighters and community safe.
I think it's fair to say that this commission is not opposed to negotiating after this vote is taken in some manner. And I don't think anybody here is opposed to getting to the level of 48, which we may or may not need to get to. We just cannot have we just cannot give up the right to set the staffing. We cannot abdicate our position on controlling staffing, which is not to say that that's not an item we can negotiate. I believe it is an item we can successfully negotiate. Dick Brady can't give that guarantee, but this entire body, as a body, I think, can give that at a later date.
But the issue is that we don't want to include that in this agreement because we don't want to give up that right.
That's
correct. So why can't we guarantee that we will add 3 additional people outside of this agreement?
Is that like a legal question? Can we?
Well, I guess it's a question to the commission. The commissioners would have to be the ones that.
Isn't that a legitimate question to be brought up at any commission meeting that we have?
There are ways to budget for additional staff that you all have control over. Obviously, if you want to increase the staffing budget for the fire department to provide for additional bodies, you can. There are other ways to explore agreement with the union through negotiations and outside of negotiations on staffing without putting a specific clause in the contract. I do want to caution us all that some of this, we're veering into territory where we were discussing the collective bargaining process. So I would like some of our comments to be circumspect, I suppose.
Okay. And the only reason I make that suggestion is maybe it's more palatable if it's rejected, if there is some sort of agreement, not necessarily an agreement, because I don't want to. But
again, I mean, I don't want to discuss the future collective bargaining process, but yes, there are options. To answer your question, there are many, many options other than
part of future negotiations.
Yes.
Understood.
All of which would be preferable than adding this to the contract, from staff's opinion.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Poole.
I'm comfortable that sufficient commissioners have heard the concerns that we have and recognize that we need to take a close look at what we do with the fire department staffing and in general. There's several things on there to discuss, and I can only hope that the fire department will sit down and continue the negotiations, and I'll support the what's on the table. We should reject this for the reasons stated. We can't give up our right to decide how many people are on any department in any union, but we do have to deal with people reasonably.
Mr. Heil, will you poll the commission on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
No.
Mr. Pajali?
No.
Mr. Harris? No. Mr. Brady?
Explain to me again what we're voting on.
You're voting to reject the.
You just got 3 no's.
I'm sorry, there's some confusion. Sorry, a yes vote, just to make clear, we will make it very clear. A yes vote is to reject. A no vote is to accept.
All right.
Is everyone comfortable with their initial vote? Before we.
A yes vote is to reject.
A yes vote would be to reject.
Okay.
So
should I re-poll, just to be clear? I'm going to re-poll just to be clear.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Mr. Waddington?
No.
Mr. Pajali?
No.
Mr. Harris?
Yes, to reject.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
No.
Mr. Meisner? I apologize. I apologize. I'm sorry.
So that, just to be clear, in this case, that means that the contract is ratified.
That means, yes, that we have voted to ratify we voted to accept the contract because it must be by 3/5.
So we just formalized 48 firefighters.
That's correct.
Forever.
That's correct.
Okay.
At least.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
You're adjourned.